Great.
Welcome, everyone. We are live on air with Dr. Nate Matthews, who's the director of the Global Resilience Partnership. We can see that we already have 50 people joining us. I welcome all of you to the last MOOC of this course. It was a wonderful experience having everyone here. The energy was great. The course had over 5,500 enrollments, and the students who enrolled also have stayed with us throughout the course. So it's absolutely wonderful. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you.
Great. Do you mind if I just run through a few of my opening remarks then, just to sort of set the scene? Okay,
please,
great.
Go on.
I don't know where you lost me last time, but that was at... Do you know where you lost me at the last one?
I could hear you very well, but since our students lost you at different points, so maybe you could just go back and recap a little bit.
Okay, great. Okay. So first, again, thank you very much all for joining this. I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion over the next hour or so. I hope you enjoyed the course. And as I mentioned, I'm Nate Matthews. I'm the program director at the Global Resilience Partnership. We're a partnership of public and private organizations joining forces towards a resilient, sustainable, and prosperous future for vulnerable people and places. And we believe that resilience underpins a sustainable development in a more unpredictable world. And please take a look on our website if you'd like to learn about our partners and some of the work that we do. When we're thinking about water and energy, and especially this nexus, we're thinking of a nexus as connections between members of a group or thing. So how are water and energy connected? And when we really get into the interesting parts of this, it's specifically around interdependencies, choke points, and trade-offs. And I'll go into those in a bit more detail in a moment. So when we think about water for energy, we can think across thermoelectric cooling, hydropower, extraction and refining, and fuel production. And energy for water, that's when we think about wastewater treatment, energy associated with water use, extraction and transmission, and of course, drinking water treatment. So just touching on some of the big headlines, keeping US power on each day requires more water than 140 New York cities, for example. Petroleum from the Canadian oil sands extracted via surface mining techniques can consume about 20 times more water than conventional oil drilling. Water discharged from coal or nuclear plant is hotter by about an average of 8 degrees in the summer than when it entered the plant. And landowners in shale gas drilling areas have reported foul smells in tap water, and toxic chemicals such as benzene have been detected. So really the basic messages across the water and energy nexus are that water and energy are inextricably linked, but still awareness and acknowledgement of this remains low, that global energy and water demands are increasing with existing and projected supply issues. Climate change, population growth, and increasing use of consumption will affect the availability and use of all three. And solutions in one area often negatively impact other areas. And this is where we again talk about these connections and interdependencies. So when we think about energy in water, the water supply chain, we've got across the main areas of use of water are in the fuel extraction and processing and power generation. And also I just wanted to highlight sort of how oil and water really differ. So both resources, if we take oil, for example, compared to water, are finite. In terms of flow, only as a withdrawal from stocks. But of course, water flows through the hydrological cycle. Oil is non-renewable, but water is globally renewable, but sometimes not locally renewable. We can transport oil economically, but long distance of transport of water is not really economically viable. And almost all uses of petroleum are consumptive, as opposed to the use of water, again, which I mentioned, can be renewed. Just to jump out also and to focus a little bit down into hydropower, which we focus on in the course, hydropower is often proposed as a nexus solution, and it's a key source of global energy across China, Canada, Brazil. And there's over 1,064 gigawatts of global capacity in hydropower. And just to put that in perspective, about 100 megawatts could power about 100,000 homes. And there are over 45,000 large dams in the world, and that's a dam of 15 meters in height or larger. And hydropower impacts on water across river fragmentation, sedimentation flows. It changes the hydrological cycle of the river, so it changes the flood pulse nature of a river, reducing floods, but also changing the timing of seasonal flows. And it, of course, also has positive impacts in terms of irrigation opportunities, fisheries within the reservoir, and those are the impacts on water. And then not thinking across water, of course, positive impacts on electricity production and a relatively clean source of electricity production. Critically also, though, when we look at water and energy with relation to hydropower, is that hydropower has strong links to political and economic factors, including state building. And the management of trade-offs within hydropower is a really complex challenge. So that's just a brief introduction to the course, just a few minutes, and now I look forward to taking your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. Our very first question is from Karini. And the question is that African countries have many rivers and lakes, but they are sorely lacking in energy. What advice will you give to our leaders and to the population to make this water resource profitable for energy?
I think my answer is to look at diversified sources of energy for sure. So hydropower and nuclear are not the only answers, but to really diversify types of energy. But when you do use, for example, dams to produce hydropower for electricity, is to be careful about where you put them. So dams, like all types of electricity, have trade-offs. Now, some dams produce huge amounts of electricity and don't impact the river, because they could be a run-of-the-river dam, which allows the water to go through the dam fairly quickly, as opposed to creating a large reservoir that displaces people and affects ecosystems and doesn't really change the river. Those types of dams that are also multiple use, perhaps having irrigation or other benefits, are and when done well, and especially when planned well across the basin, can be really effective. But I think it's really about diversifying. So depending on the type of country, I mean, Africa is, of course, a big continent, is really being careful with the use of dams. In the US and Europe and Canada, and I'm Canadian, we see a lot of dams being decommissioned now because they weren't done, they weren't planned very well. And also with the increasing changes across the climate, the reliability of hydropower can also be an issue. So I think it's really about careful planning with dams and really having adequate measures to manage the trade-offs of them and being honest and transparent about those trade-offs.
That's great insight. So our next question is from Camilo. And Camilo Martinez asks us if by 2050, 80% and 55% more energy and water will be needed, what would be the energy sources without compromising water withdrawal levels? Solar and wind energy will not be as efficient to cover it all.
Yeah, it's a good question. And certainly we hope for improvements in technologies. If we use, for example, thermoelectric cooling plants, I mean, they use a lot of water, but the water they use is immediately deposited back into the system, into the hydrological cycle. So it's especially in once-through cooling systems or even a closed-loop cooling system, the water stays within the plant and is used multiple times. So I think there's something important there to distinguish about how energy often uses water is quite different in a way than agriculture uses water. Energy that uses water, for example, hydropower or thermoelectric cooling plants, may change the temperature of water. It may occasionally change the quality of that water, but the water is used, but then it automatically re-enters the cycle in most instances. Where agriculture, for example, the water goes into the root system and it flows up through the roots in what's called evapotranspiration, and then it goes up through the plant, the stoma of the plant, and out into the sky, and then it could rain. That water could then rain somewhere else. It goes, into the precipitation shed or the watershed. So I think it really comes down to careful planning. Certainly we could use a lot more solar and wind and tidal power. And there are just billions of dollars of subsidies that are for more traditional energy sources such as petroleum, oil, and gas. And if we were to shift some of those to wind energy and solar, then we might see a lot more progress and efficiency gains in those types of energy mixes. So I think it almost needs that reshifting to meet the future projected energy and water demands.
Right, and a lot of political will for that matter.
Indeed, yeah, it's a difficult one, and there's a lot of vested interests that stop that shift, and we see that in the power of the oil and gas companies for sure.
Yeah. So our next question is from Mona, and Mona is wondering that since water and energy are inextricably linked, is it possible to create energy law and link it with water law to improve construction and save both efficiency, also health, economy, and climate change?
It's a good question. It's a difficult one. So often, as I mentioned in the beginning, although they're inextricably linked, still awareness of these remains quite low, and a lot of laws and regulations that are created are often created sort of within the silo that they're established. So energy regulations are created without adequate consideration of water regulations and vice versa. Now, it's certainly possible to do both and have better coordination across ministries and things like that. With regards to law, though, as well, I would also mention that laws only have limited ability or capacity to evoke change, and it depends on the country. Where countries where the rule of law is strong, then laws can be powerful. But countries where the rule of law isn't strong, laws can just be on paper and they may not be so effective. So certainly it is possible, but it's complicated, and there's sort of the vested interest within the two groups, both the water group and the energy group. And water, if you look at it within its hierarchy or its space within ministries, is often very near the bottom. So ministers of water often aren't as powerful as ministers of finance, for example, or even ministers of energy. Rarely are the two combined, and there certainly needs to be more discussion between the two and more coordination between the two.
Great. Mona, I hope that answered your question. Our next question is from Messeret Dawit, and she asks, water resource development from a river for producing energy in developing countries impacted people who are living downstream of the river. Which framework or methodology is best to avoid negative impacts in such cases?
I don't think there's any one framework that is really best or methodology is best, but I think the most important thing is really taking a systems approach to understanding trade-offs and interdependencies. So, and a systems approach is really looking at water's impacts across the basin in which it's situated and across, say, the environment, economies, society, and economics. So it's really just thinking this wide approach, and you recognize that impacts occur on short-term timescales and long-term timescales, and benefits also occur on short and long-term timescales. So it's really that systems approach, and recognizing that water and energy are part of a very big complex system within the planet. And when you put in, say, for example, a dam, or you put in a large irrigation system, or even a wastewater treatment plant, or things like that, it can have far-reaching impacts into the future. And those are often locked in. So if you build a dam, that usually lasts for 50 or 60, perhaps 100, even 200 years, sometimes even longer. And so what are the impacts of those across fisheries, across ecosystem services, across what are the potential benefits as well, in terms of energy production? How does it affect climate change? So it's really that systems approach that I think is critical, and it's not easy, certainly not. And increasingly, governments and the private sector are getting better at understanding it, because without adequately considering it, there are really significant risks. And we're seeing that within the volatility of the current climate. So without really understanding the risks and the trade-offs within the system, you can have dams that are built and then within 5 or 10 years, they're producing half the electricity that they were slated to produce. And dams are a very significant investment. For example, they can cost billions of dollars. So there's real risks there that are driving people to better understand the system dynamics.
The next question which we have is a topic which has been widely discussed throughout the course and also in the discussion forum in the course. We've had a lot of learners discussing about green water. So Francisco Cabrera has asked this question, that green water is compatible with the Nexus. Any example which can have systemic implications?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It doesn't so much fit within the water energy nexus, but it certainly fits within the water energy food nexus. So we know that green water, of course, is the water within the soil systems, and that's then when we think about really green water, we really need to bring in the food dimension. And the nexus, of course, can be expanded. I mean, it doesn't necessarily at all, for that matter, stop at water and energy. We could say water, energy, food. We could say water, energy, climate change, water, energy, climate change, food, finance. There's lots of different variations of the nexus. Probably, so the very early framings of the nexus were around water and energy, but as it's since developed, the terminology is most commonly used across water, energy, and food. And that's where you need to take in considerations of green water, especially when you think about the implications of irrigation or groundwater withdrawals, and then, of course, adding in the climate change components of that.
Right. Moving on, we have a lot of questions coming now. So we are really moving from one question to another. If anybody needs more explanation to whatever Nate said, please do type in your further queries in the chat box so we can take it up. Our next question is from Abraham Freeman, and he's wondering if should there be an international court of environmental degradation, since the International Criminal Court is doing well with prosecution of war crime.
It's a good question. I mean, it certainly would be welcome, but the problem with these codes is that they're not often signed up to by the sort of worst offenders. And so the ones that don't recognize them are the ones that are often doing the biggest or causing the most negative impact. There are a lot of laws that protect water sources, for example, like the United Nations Watercourses Convention, lots of internal laws within countries around environmental impacts assessments or environmental social impacts assessments. And in many cases, these laws by the letter are very strong, but they're just not enforced. And this applies to places like Canada through to least developed countries. So there's often a real challenge there. It's an interesting thought to think about, what an international environmental degradation court might look like. And I would certainly, I certainly think it's important that people more strongly value the environment and recognize the impacts of it, and really take an understanding that a healthy environment is essential for a healthy society and healthy economy. But I think the practicalities of it are not well fitted to today's society. And I guess the problems of today's society.
Right. Moving on to the next question. Anderson is asking a very, very general question, which might be of interest to everyone. And Anderson is wondering, how can climate change threat energy supply worldwide, thinking on hydropower energy?
Very good question. It's a really tough one to answer, but the best answer that we have is that there's going to be more volatility. So we can look at climate change models across most of the world, and in most places, they point to increasing droughts, but also many times increasing floods. So it's that real uncertainty that we're moving out of, or moving into, I should say, that is the really big impact. And And that will certainly have large impacts on hydropower, for example, but on also other types of water energy nexus connections. So with regards to hydropower, dams could increasingly flood or overflow, which would affect communities and cities downstream. They could also be dry. Like we've seen in the western U.S. now, where we had that massive drought across California. There was a big dam collapse in Laos, in Southeast Asia last year, also because of really heavy rain. So I think the big answer is that increasing uncertainty that will occur, and how do you really manage for that uncertainty? And then the question that next arises is infrastructure like dams that really lock you into a single pathway for 50 or 100 years the best way to produce energy given this uncertainty? And so if the answer is perhaps no to that, in many cases, not in all cases, then what are the alternatives? And that's where we really need to think more creatively and produce some advances in other types of energy technology.
Right, Nate, since you mentioned dams, Francisco had a follow-up questions, and the question was that small dams can be healthy to a river in short time. Are they mobile dams to understand systems dynamics? Are there mobile dams to understand systems dynamics?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
Yeah, the question is that small dams can be healthy to a river in short time. Are there mobile dams to understand systems dynamics?
Mobile dams, did you say?
Mobile dams.
Mobile, yeah. No, not that I know of. I mean, small dams can be better. So micro hydropower, pico hydropower, which is even smaller, or even small scale hydropower, which is usually below 10 meters in height, they can be easier to install. They can provide important electricity for local communities, and have less impact. But the flip side of that is that for example, in the Mekong, 90% of the fish are migratory species, and those fish, it doesn't matter if the dam is 100 meters in height or 5 meters in height, they can't move upstream when a dam is in the way. So there's I guess you have to think carefully about again where the dams are installed, and what are the impacts of those dams on the ecosystems and environments. Small dams, of course, don't do well to regulate flooding, which larger dams do, but they can also just equally be an impediment to river transport and navigation, unless they're built with locks or ways, different types of passages. So I don't know about mobile dams. I've never heard of them before. I don't think they exist, but certainly small dams are sort of, again, all of these types of energy have trade-offs. And small dams can be just as impactful as large dams in some cases, or have less benefits or more benefits. So it really is very context specific.
Thank you so much, Nate. Next question is from Olfa. In Tunisia, exploring shale gas created a big controversy due to effects on groundwater. We heard experts from both sides and opposite views. Could you please tell us if it really threats the aquifers?
Again, it's also very context specific, and it depends on how it's done, but certainly there are proven threats to aquifers from shale gas, and the wastewater that's produced when it's injected into the ground to release the gas can leak into aquifers and pollute aquifers for long periods of time. So yes, absolutely, there are certainly threats to water quality and due to shale gas, and we see a lot of that in the U.S. emerging now. And it's a difficult one to manage because you do need to inject water at a very high pressure into shale rock to release the gas, and this can have significant impacts on the water quality.
Okay. Jim says that you mentioned the water used in the Canadian, you talked about the water used in the Canadian oil sands. There is also significant energy used in the extraction. How would you advise the Canadian and the Alberta governments on more effective policies?
Really, I mean, it's a good question. I guess as a Canadian myself, I would probably say that the oil sands are not a environmentally sustainable type of energy source. They're only economically viable when oil is above a certain price per barrel. And as you mentioned, both the energy use and the water use needed to extract oil from these sands is very high. But as mentioned at the beginning, both water and energy are very political topics, and they're deeply intertwined with politics and economics. And so, for the Canadian government, they obviously see oil production and the potential revenue across the country as important for the future of the economy. I think that's quite a short-term view, and really disregards the impacts of those, especially over the long term. But I'm not the prime minister.
All right. Next question is from Saba Basco. Annually, the world's coal power plants consume enough water to meet the basic needs of 1 billion people. Many of the coal plants are in over-withdrawn areas. Is more efficient cooling for coal the solution?
Absolutely. If you use once-through cooling systems for coal, it can be more efficient. And again, as I mentioned before, I think you have to be a little bit careful in our understanding of how a plant uses water, because it does run the water through the system, but then the water is often immediately returned to often to its source or downstream if it's a river. But it can be returned, as I mentioned before, at a higher temperature. And it can sometimes affect the quality of how it's returned. I think the bigger impacts for coal are with regards to its impacts on the climate. And so I don't think really coal, we've seen a large phase out of coal globally over the last, 5 to 10 years. And I think really those impacts are really more important to deal with, and to think about alternative energy sources with regards to that. But it does use a lot of water, and as you mentioned, it's often within over-withdrawn areas, and this can really cause significant problems in terms of the sinking of land. So sinkholes can emerge in terms of its impacts on lakes or rivers, and on agriculture, and also on aquifers. So groundwater can be really significantly impacted over the long term. So more efficient use is important, but also thinking about alternative energy sources where they're viable.
Thank you for the answer, Nate. Next question is from Abel. And the question is that we have a situation in Uganda with an area which highly floods during a wet season, hence disturbing communities, and dries almost completely during the dry season. How can this flooding period be resourceful?
So there are lots of ways to approach flooding areas. So the really more traditional engineering approach is to find some sort of hard gray infrastructure. So a large, maybe it's a concrete dam or otherwise, and really stop the flooding. But again, as I mentioned, I think this is not really a way forward, given climate volatility, but also the real impacts that has. So floods are a really key source of sediment transfer across an area, so they allow for healthy soils. They're also really important for ecosystem services, which, for fish breeding and other things like this. And there are a lot of systems of what we call flood-based livelihood systems, which allow people to farm in these areas. They're difficult, but they can certainly be productive. Flood areas often have very high soil quality, and can produce really productive landscapes. So it's really about understanding, the types of flooding, and really developing systems to allow for floodwaters to be perhaps like harnessed with earth dams in the wet season, so they can be used in the dry season to provide water for fields, and thinking about infrastructure like roads and others that are resilient to floods, so they're not really significantly impacted by floods. So it allows sort of people and floods and the environment to thrive together within this space, recognizing the important services that floods provide to people and the planet.
Thank you. That was very well explained. Our next question is from Wendy. And Wendy is asking if, taking into account high energy consumption in water treatment, are there successful projects about energy production based on water treatment or sewage water?
Certainly, there are more efficient systems, and wastewater treatment does use a lot of energy. But of course, it's very important to treat wastewater. And London, for example, where I currently live, has a very effective system of wastewater treatment. And the water we drink from our taps here, there's a percentage of that which is recycled water. So it's water that has been treated. So it's wastewater that has been treated and then enters back in through the drinking water system. Culturally, that can be a challenge. I lived previously in Australia, and they tried to develop a wastewater treatment or water recycling scheme. And some politicians got up on stage and just said that they wouldn't want to drink recycled water. But also, recycled water can be really used effectively for agriculture. So I think it's really about thinking about the use and the use of water that comes out. And so if you're using water for agriculture, it doesn't require as much energy. You don't have to treat it to as high of quality. And when you use it for drinking water, it of course has to be of a higher quality. But then there's opportunities to regain that the costs of that treatment back through charging people or charging customers. I think there's a lot of improvements in technology in terms of wastewater treatment, and certainly it's become more efficient over the years, but a lot of that as well is happening in countries that have the money to invest. In a lot of places, wastewater is still just dumped into the sea. And certainly that happens a lot across the Mediterranean, where wastewater is just dumped into the sea. It's not treated at all. And that can be really harmful to the oceans and also can cause health problems for people.
Right, but also, so there's also a lot of stigma attached with using recycled water. Most people are not really comfortable with drinking it or even using it for other purposes. So do you think that community awareness and then spreading knowledge about it is also an important component of wastewater usage and recycling it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it essentially comes down to a better understanding of water. We have all drank recycled water because all of the water on the earth is the same water that's been around for millions and millions, billions of years. So it all goes through the hydrological cycle, and whether it goes through quickly or as it would in a wastewater treatment plant and then enters our tap water again, or whether it goes through slowly as through rainwater, it's all recycled water. So I think we have to really understand the hydrological cycle. Now, people where wastewater actually enters a water treatment plant, it actually comes out as a very, very high quality water, and there's good grounds for showing how that is very safe. We do a lot of that in Canada, the US, Singapore is almost entirely the new water that is used there is all recycled water. Parts of Australia, the UK, and all over Europe use recycled water. So certainly there's cultural components to it and stigmas against it, but the reality is that we drink recycled water everywhere in the world because it's the same water. It just goes through the hydrological cycle.
Right. Mr. GB Lensway has a question which is in continuation to the same thing which we were talking about. And he's wondering, what are the trade-offs in using treated sewage water in artificial recharge?
Treated sewage water in artificial recharge of aquifers? Is that?
I would imagine that. It's not written, but I would imagine it's talking about aquifers.
Okay. So again, it just it depends on to what quality the water is treated, but it can certainly be a viable option. But I guess aquifers are probably, I would say, are best recharged when they're recharged naturally. Now, some aquifers are fossil water. So you have like in the Great Nubian Aquifer in Algeria and Libya, this is water that has been there for tens of thousands of years, and there can be large water sources there, and they're not renewed. So that water is there and it's not renewed anymore because it's changed the the ability for those aquifers to recharge has changed as the climate changed, and they don't get rainfall across the Sahara now to allow those to be recharged. But recharging with treated sewer water can actually, the biggest trade-off is the expense, really. It costs a lot of money to treat water, and it costs a lot of energy. Well, of course, the energy is linked to the money and the costs. So that's the really big trade-off. There's a lot of interesting ways to recharge aquifers, however, though, by using natural systems. So wetlands, for example, can be fantastic, I guess, or have fantastic abilities to clean water, and then allow the water to then flow out of wetlands and perhaps into aquifers. So plants, and also water-sensitive urban design within cities, which allow sort of cities to capture rainwater and other types of wastewater, and then actually treat that water naturally through using plants, can also be very powerful at actually cleaning water naturally.
Thank you. I hope your question was answered. Please do let us know if you meant something else. Next question is from Fabian Chang, and Fabian is asking if, so he's saying that satellite data can improve decision making of water infrastructure for agriculture use and asset management of utilities. Is there a fund from multilateral banks that support this trend?
Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? Sorry. So a fund from...
Satellite data can improve decision-making of water infrastructure for agriculture use and asset management of utilities. Is there any fund from multilateral banks that support this trend?
There are certainly funds from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank that support technology use to improve wastewater treatment and water treatment, and also just to support water use. I know that some of those support satellite data or improvements on satellite data technology, but I'm not 100% sure that there's any specific fund that relates to the use of satellite data for this. There have been really significant improvements, though, I would say, with regards to satellite data and what can be measured in terms of water use, also measuring groundwater capabilities, and both groundwater and surface water. And there's a whole group that works on this called the Water Accounting Group. And I think they're partially out of UNESCO IHE, that looks at how to account for the amount of water within systems and then improve its management. And this links, of course, to water treatment and understanding its understanding within an asset class.
Right, thank you. Ibrahim had a follow-up question. It's not really a follow-up question, but he had a second question, and he's asking, it is certain that population growth will further impact water quality and quantity. Does the rate at which people are reproducing need to be controlled to save water resources?
I mean, I think population growth is going to certainly put increasing pressure on water resources, but I think it's more about how we use water. If we look at the population growth projections of the UN, somewhere between 10 and 12 billion by 2050, but it's more about the way that we use water. I think there's certainly enough water available to feed or to supply that type of population, but only if we use it a bit more sustainably. I certainly don't think it's my place to say that some people should have more or less children. We do often see with countries as they go through a development cycle that they have lots of children early, and then as you look at Europe, Canada, the US now, it usually drops down to 2 or 3, and some countries have been very good at bringing population under control. China, for example. Thailand also had a very successful implementation of reducing sort of the number of children per family. But again, there are trade-offs. There are huge political, social dimensions to this, and that's a very complex challenge. So I think that, I guess my answer is, as I stated at the beginning, is that there's enough water to supply quite a few people on the planet if it's used sustainably.
Thank you. Next question is by Cora. And Cora is asking, what are the water trade-offs of climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies in the energy sector in arid and semi-arid regions?
Wow. So the water trade-offs, I mean, I think within arid and semi-arid regions, really what those regions are looking at, again, as I mentioned before, is really increased droughts and sort of extremes of weather. And in arid and semi-arid region, the trade-offs are really, in thinking about how to balance the needs of the people who are on the ground, especially as those populations grow and their water consumption grows, with the limited water available. And even in non-semi-arid areas like Cape Town, like we saw last year, of course, there can be really significant pressures on cities. So in arid areas, we're going to increasingly see pressures on cities. Jordan, for example, is a great example of, or a very complex and challenging example, if you will, in Amman of the pressures on water. I think a lot of the changes that will have to be made, and keeping in mind that agriculture uses about 80%, 80, sometimes up to even to 90% of the world's water, will be on making different decisions about what kind of crops we grow and how water is used within agricultural systems. I think actually feeding or again supplying the drinking water for people is a fairly minor point. But it's really, when we think about water and its use, it's really linked to agriculture. So growing cotton, for example, in Egypt has a long history, but you're growing cotton, which is a high water consumptive crop in the desert. Those sort of change, we might have to see increasing changes like that into the future.
Thank you so much, Nate. Since we are nearing, and we have already actually exceeded our webinar time, so we'd only be taking a couple of questions now, so maybe one or two more questions. And for everybody else, you please feel free to send your questions to us over email or discuss them in the discussion forum, and we'll try our best to send it to Nate, who can answer it later. So for we'll take two questions now, and one of them is again by Fabian Chang, and Fabian is wondering, desalination plant requires 23 times more energy than surface water treatment, and cost of desalinized water is 4 times higher than treated fresh water. How to drive innovation and efficiency into desalinization process?
Great question. So, I mean, desalination is viable certainly for drinking water, but yeah, because of the costs and the energy required, it's not really viable for, say, for agriculture or other high consumptive areas of water, or areas where water is used. It's driving innovation, and it is a tough one. It's reduced massively, I must admit. Over the last 20 years, the cost has come down, more than 5 times. And I think we just have to wait for improvements in technology. There's a lot of very smart people and a lot of smart and a lot of money really being invested within desalination to find new and more economically viable solutions that are more efficient. And I think we'll get there soon. So I think the innovation will come. But as I said, if you can crack that, then there's certainly really significant money available for you. So the private sector is heavily involved in this space, and I think we'll see. Continue to see efficiency improvements in desalination as over the coming years.
Great. So for the last question of the session, we have a question from you, Rupesh Jadhav from India, and Rupesh is asking, what can be the different future amendments in water policy considering water, food, energy, and economic nexus for developing nations.
Wow, sorry, can you read that one again? The different policy considerations, was it?
Yeah, what can be the different future amendments in the water policy considering the nexus?
Wow, that's a big last question to end on. I think that I would say certainly the systems approach. I mean, I really think that's really critical. It's in the past when we've seen policies around water and energy, they tend to disregard the basin scale. So where that water, the source of that water, where it's coming from, and its impacts both further upstream and further downstream, and its connection, to the environment. And increasingly, we understand that producing water policies without considering the environment has really detrimental impacts on the quality or the ability of those water policies to be effective, and also on the people and economies, because we have to understand that you really can't have a functioning society without a functioning water system and a healthy water system. And to have a healthy water system, you really need to consider the environment. That's critical. And so I think it's really about that systems approach, and really taking into consideration the trade-offs and better managing those trade-offs, both over the short term and the long term. And that's really critical as well. The scales here and time scales are both important.
Great, that was very well explained, and I think that perfectly summarized the webinar and brought it to a very neat end. I understand that not all the questions have been answered. All the questions which people were asking, we did not have enough time to answer them all, but we would try our best to send them to Nate and post the replies maybe in the discussion forum, or if you're reaching us out through email, we would definitely respond to you. Thank you so much, Nate, for taking out time and for conducting this excellent session. I'm sure the students are very happy and they've actually had a very fruitful session with us.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your questions, and I hope you enjoyed the course. And again, thank you again for your questions.
Thank you so much. We are closing for now, and please do finish all your assessments because this is the last week of the course. Be on time, submit your assessments, and finish the course well. Good luck, everyone, and good night and good day.
Good luck, good night, and good day.